It's fascinating how the human body hides some of its greatest threats in plain sight, tucked beneath layers of muscle and wrapped around vital organs. Visceral fat often behaves like a silent intruder, shifting hormones, altering metabolic signals, and increasing inflammatory markers without any outward warning. Many people spend years trying to change their bodies from the outside, unaware that the most dangerous transformation happens deep within. Scientists describe visceral fat as metabolically active, meaning it doesn't simply sit there, it constantly communicates with your system. It releases cytokines, influences insulin sensitivity, and quietly reshapes metabolic priorities. This hidden activity is one reason the body often resists change, making fat loss feel slower than expected. Understanding visceral fat is less about aesthetic goals and more about appreciating how profoundly it influences long-term health. Research consistently shows that reducing this fat decreases the risk of cardiovascular disease, diabetes, and chronic inflammation. And one of the most accessible ways to begin this reduction is through walking, something so simple that its power is often underestimated. But here's where curiosity begins to build. Walking doesn't start burning visceral fat immediately. There's a precise metabolic moment when the switch flips. And once you understand that moment, your daily walks will never feel the same again. Before we go deeper, tell me in the comments, did you already know visceral fat behaves like an active organ? I'm curious to see how many people have heard this before. Walking is the most universal movement known to humans. No equipment, no complex technique, just your body working with gravity and rhythm. Yet beneath the simplicity lies a cascade of physiological reactions that rival more intense workouts. When you start walking, your circulatory system increases oxygen delivery, your muscles draw on stored energy, and your nervous system shifts into a more alert but steady mode. What makes walking particularly powerful is its sustainability. High-intensity workouts burn energy faster, but they also raise cortisol disproportionately in certain individuals, especially beginners. Elevated cortisol can temporarily inhibit fat oxidation. Walking, on the other hand, creates an environment where the body feels safe enough to release stored energy gradually and consistently. In many scientific studies, individuals who walk daily exhibit improved insulin sensitivity, reduced systemic inflammation, and greater mitochondrial efficiency. These changes form the foundation that allows visceral fat to be mobilized. You can think of walking as a gentle ignition switch that turns on deeper metabolic machinery. And yet, despite everything happening inside the body, one question remains. At what exact moment does walking begin tapping into the stubborn visceral fat instead of easier energy sources? That answer is coming very soon in this video. Stay with me. The body doesn't operate on guesswork. It follows biochemical sequences. When you begin walking, the first pathway activated is the phosphagen system, responsible for providing quick bursts of energy. It lasts only seconds. Then the body smoothly transitions into glycolysis, drawing glucose from the bloodstream and glycogen from the muscles. During these early minutes, fat is not the star of the show yet. Metabolic activation is essentially your body evaluating energy demand. As your muscles contract repeatedly, they signal mitochondria to increase ATP production. With each passing minute, oxygen availability becomes a determining factor. The more stable your breathing becomes, the more efficiently your body can transition toward fat oxidation. Researchers often refer to this shift as hitting the fat oxidation threshold. It is the point at which fat finally becomes a primary contributor to energy production. The timing varies slightly from person to person due to fitness level, mitochondrial density, and hormonal environment, but the physiological mechanism is universal. Understanding this threshold is crucial because walking does not burn visceral fat simply because time has passed. It burns it when your body reaches this metabolic readiness. And we're getting closer to revealing that moment with precision. Somewhere between the start of your walk and the stabilization of your breathing rhythm, your body crosses an invisible internal line. You won't feel it. There's no sudden surge of energy, no burning sensation, but metabolically, it marks the transition from accessible fuel to deeper reserves. Scientists observe this moment using respiratory exchange ratios, tracking how much oxygen you consume versus how much carbon dioxide you expel. At this point, the body subtly shifts its priorities. Glucose becomes less dominant and fat oxidation ramps up. However, what's truly captivating is that not all fat behaves the same way. Subcutaneous fat is accessible, but visceral fat requires more specific metabolic conditions. And yes, that condition emerges while walking once this invisible line is crossed. One of the reasons walking is effective is because it keeps the body below the threshold where cortisol spikes dramatically. In this stable zone, hormonal conditions favor the mobilization of visceral fat, which tends to respond to lower intensity, longer duration activity. This means that the body isn't simply deciding to burn fat randomly, it is responding to a biochemical environment that walking patiently builds. And that brings us directly to the next key piece of the puzzle. Heart rate is the most reliable external indicator of when your body enters fat oxidation territory. When it stays within the moderate zone, generally around 50 to 70% of your maximum heart rate, your physiology begins favoring fat as a primary energy source. Too low, and activation is slow. Too high, and glucose dominates again. During walking, reaching the optimal heart rate zone typically takes a few minutes, depending on your pace. This is why rushing into a fast walk from the start isn't necessary. Instead, allowing your heart rate to rise progressively creates the perfect environment for visceral fat mobilization. Scientific studies show that individuals who maintain this moderate zone consistently achieve greater reductions in abdominal fat. What's remarkable is that you don't need a monitor to sense the appropriate zone. A light increase in breathing, the ability to speak comfortably, and a steady rhythm all indicate you're approaching ideal activation. This is the heart rate window where the metabolic shift becomes sustainable. And soon, within this same physiological state, the exact moment walking begins to burn visceral fat becomes crystal clear. You'll understand it fully as we continue. Somewhere during your walk, after your heart rate stabilizes and your breathing becomes rhythmic, your body reaches the metabolic point where glucose stops being the preferred fuel. This moment is known in exercise physiology as shifting toward beta oxidation. It's not dramatic, and you won't physically feel the switch, but inside your cells, a measurable change is happening. Your mitochondria begin pulling more fatty acids into their pathways, increasing fat-derived energy output. Multiple studies using indirect calorimetry show that this shift typically occurs after a consistent period of movement, once glucose demand has leveled and oxygen uptake has increased sufficiently. The timing isn't universal. It depends on factors like fitness, diet, and sleep, but the pattern remains constant. Sustained movement leads to the metabolic crossover where fat oxidation becomes more efficient. This metabolic shift is crucial because visceral fat requires higher mitochondrial engagement to be burned. While subcutaneous fat is used earlier and more easily, visceral fat only becomes a meaningful contributor once your fat oxidation machinery is fully active. Walking excels at creating these conditions because it keeps stress hormones low and oxygen availability high. This means that there is a scientifically measurable moment, quiet, internal, and precise, when walking stops being low-effort movement and becomes a targeted visceral fat-burning process. And as you continue walking, this activation strengthens minute by minute.
Visceral fat isn't just storage. It behaves like an endocrine organ. It releases hormones, communicates with your liver, and influences inflammation. When you begin walking consistently within the fat oxidation zone, the signals around visceral fat start to change. Increased blood flow, improved insulin sensitivity, and hormonal regulation all make this type of fat more accessible as fuel. One of the most interesting findings in metabolic studies is that visceral fat has a higher turnover rate than many people assume. This means once your body is in the correct physiological state, visceral fat is mobilized more readily. Walking enhances this process by stabilizing your autonomic nervous system, reducing sympathetic overdrive, and lowering circulating cortisol, which otherwise protects visceral fat from being used. Over time, walking also leads to an increase in enzymes responsible for transporting fatty acids into the mitochondria. This adaptation makes the body progressively more efficient at drawing from visceral reserves. It's a gentle shift but a powerful one, especially for individuals new to exercise or returning after long breaks. And there's a fascinating emotional component too. Many people start walking for physical reasons, but later discover mental clarity, improved mood, and reduced anxiety. These changes reinforce consistency, which is one of the greatest weapons against visceral fat accumulation. Most people assume fat loss depends only on how long they walk or how fast they move. But there's a lesser-known concept referred to in scientific literature as the steady-state metabolic window. This is the period in your walk where oxygen consumption, heart rate, and fat oxidation reach balance. It's within this window that sustained visceral fat burning becomes most efficient. This window doesn't open immediately. It often begins around the time your body has fully transitioned into fat oxidation and continues as long as intensity remains moderate and stable. What makes it so powerful is that it represents a sweet spot where the body is producing energy primarily from fat without unnecessary strain on the nervous system or spikes in cortisol. Understanding this window transforms how you interpret walking. Instead of thinking of the walk as a straight line where every minute is equal, you begin to see why a 20-minute walk is different from a 40-minute one. Not because of calorie count, but because the second half usually contains more time inside this optimized metabolic zone. Once you identify this window in your own routine, walking becomes a strategic tool instead of a casual activity. And as you'll see shortly, the way you enter and maintain this window is what defines the breakdown of visceral fat. Not all walking cues the metabolic responses needed for visceral fat reduction. A casual, extremely slow walk may improve circulation and mood, but it rarely reaches the heart rate and oxygen consumption levels required for fat oxidation. Walking the right way simply means creating the internal conditions your body needs: moderate intensity, consistent rhythm, and proper posture that supports efficient breathing. Posture plays a bigger role than many realize. When the torso is upright and the diaphragm moves freely, oxygen exchange becomes easier, enabling the metabolic shift toward fat use. Overstriding, slouching, or walking with shallow breathing all reduce the efficiency of this transition, delaying the moment when visceral fat oxidation begins.
Pace variation is another factor. A pace that is too fast can push you toward glucose dependence, while a pace that is too slow may never challenge the metabolic system enough. The sweet spot is that moderate rhythm, where your breathing deepens but remains comfortable. In this state, you stimulate mitochondrial activity and hormonal balance, the exact conditions necessary for visceral fat mobilization. By understanding these nuances, walking stops being something you just do and becomes a precise and empowering practice. And as you refine it, the signals your body sends will become more noticeable, guiding you toward deeper metabolic effectiveness. Even though the shift happens internally, your body provides subtle indicators that you've entered the fat-burning stage. One of the clearest signs is stable, deeper breathing that doesn't feel forced. This reflects an optimal match between oxygen demand and supply, an essential balance for fat oxidation. Another sign is the feeling of settling into a rhythm, where your steps, breath, and heart rate align naturally. A slight increase in body warmth is also common. This doesn't come from muscular overheating, but from mitochondrial activity increasing as fat begins contributing more energy. Some people experience a sensation of clearer focus or mental lightness, which is linked to improved blood flow and reduced sympathetic tension during steady, moderate movement.
Interestingly, once your body reaches this state, energy levels often feel more sustained than during glucose-dominant phases. Fat provides a slower but steadier stream of ATP, which explains why walking becomes easier at the longer you maintain this zone. Your body isn't fighting the movement anymore. It's participating with efficiency. Now that you understand these signs, it becomes easier to detect when you've reached the internal moment walking becomes metabolically transformative. And as the video continues, this knowledge will help you fine-tune your daily walking routine for maximum visceral fat reduction. Daily walking creates metabolic adaptations that single, occasional sessions can't replicate. When you walk regularly, your mitochondria increase in number and efficiency, allowing your body to rely on fat more readily as an energy source. This means that over time, the exact moment when walking begins burning visceral fat arrives sooner in each session because your system is already primed for oxidation. Consistency also regulates hormones that directly influence visceral fat, such as insulin and cortisol. Stable insulin levels reduce the liver's tendency to store fat around abdominal organs, while balanced cortisol prevents prolonged stress responses that encourage visceral accumulation. Walking contributes to both of these regulatory effects, especially when practiced at a steady, moderate intensity day after day. Another powerful effect of consistency is improved vascular function. Increased capillary density enhances oxygen delivery, which is essential for efficient fat oxidation. Better circulation means that fatty acids, especially those stored in deeper deposits, reach the mitochondria more easily. This gradually transforms visceral fat from being stubborn to being metabolically accessible. And perhaps the most overlooked benefit of walking daily is the psychological reinforcement it creates. When movement becomes a natural part of your routine, your body and brain align toward better metabolic health. This alignment makes the fat-burning process not only achievable, but sustainable. A common mistake is assuming that if you don't feel intense exertion, your body isn't burning fat, especially visceral fat. Many people abandon walking because they expect immediate physical sensations or dramatic calorie burn. But visceral fat reduction depends on metabolic transitions, not discomfort or exhaustion. When results don't appear quickly enough, they give up before their physiology even has time to adapt. Another widespread misconception is overestimating the importance of speed. Beginners often walk too fast, pushing their heart rate into a zone that favors glucose, not fat. This leads to fatigue without entering the metabolic state where visceral fat oxidation thrives. Slowing down slightly would produce better results, but many don't realize this and become discouraged. Some also fall into the trap of inconsistency, walking intensely one day and skipping the next several. This pattern prevents the body from entering the metabolic rhythm needed to reach the fat-burning moment earlier in each session. Without that rhythm, the entire process resets, making progress feel slower than it truly is. Understanding that walking works through steady physiological refinement, not sudden extremes, helps prevent this premature dropout. When expectations align with how the body actually burns visceral fat, motivation becomes more grounded and progress becomes visible. If this explanation is helping you understand why walking works and why so many quit before seeing real results, consider tapping the super thanks to support science-based content like this. Your gesture truly helps us keep creating high-quality videos. As you continue walking regularly, something remarkable happens. Your body begins anticipating the movement even before you start. Heart rate stabilizes faster, breathing settles more quickly, and the metabolic crossover into fat oxidation occurs earlier. This is metabolic harmony, the state where your physiology aligns effortlessly with your habit. In this harmonized state, visceral fat becomes increasingly accessible as fuel. The enzymes responsible for transporting fatty acids work more effectively, while hormonal patterns shift toward balance and efficiency. Your body enters the walk already inclined to burn fat, making each session more productive than the last. There's also a profound neurological component. The brain associates walking with regulation, clarity, and energy balance. This positive reinforcement strengthens neural pathways that support consistency. Over time, this feedback loop leads to smoother transitions, longer steady-state metabolic windows, and greater reliance on visceral fat as energy. Reaching this state is not about intensity, speed, or perfection. It's about understanding how your body works and giving it what it needs through regular, moderate, intentional movement. When physiology and routine align, walking becomes more than exercise. It becomes a metabolic partnership that reshapes your health from the inside out. If this video helped you understand when walking truly starts burning visceral fat, make sure to like, subscribe, and share it with someone who needs this knowledge. Your support helps this science-based content reach more people who can benefit from it.